Look, without any further ado, let's get into our feature, which is on An Adventure in Space and Time, the 2013 telemovie that went out as part of the 50th anniversary celebrations. And Dave, I think it might be worthwhile to start off with why did we pick this? And from my side, you made the suggestion, and I was happy to run with it, because I hadn't seen this for a very long time. I mean, how long? I couldn't tell you, but it's easily years. And even then, I think the last time I saw it might have only been a quarter of it or something like that. So in terms of a proper watch of the whole thing that I can remember, I'm going to say I'm probably going back to 2013. And so I thought, yeah, this would be a really nice thing to return to after more than a decade to watch it properly. I think the last time I even thought about this was maybe a year ago when they updated the ending of it to have the Hartnell Doctor looking at Ncuti Gatwa now in that TARDIS scene at the end. I think that's probably the version they get on the iPlayer in the UK. I don't even know if it's available on the iPlayer all year round in the UK. Maybe answers on a postcard from our UK listeners. But that's where I was at with regard to picking this. It's all on you, Dave.
Yeah, so we were looking for something easy to discuss in our Christmas episode,
That's
knowing
true.
that we were very busy in our real world lives because, it's Christmas, it's the end of the year. We were very busy in our podcasting lives because this is the 5th episode we've put out this month.
Yeah.
And also I think knowing that, we, with a lot to talk about in the wash up from the Christmas special and everything, there would be, we didn't want to have a full hour, talking about an entire big season of Doctor Who. Let's find something that goes for about 80 minutes and talk about it. That's easy. So that was the practical, pragmatic reason for picking it. But also, as you say, it's been 11 years since this was broadcast. It's been a long time since I've watched it, and that's for a couple of reasons. It's got a bit of a Christmassy vibe, so I thought it was appropriate. Now, I've got a bit of a longish spiel about my journey with this. Do you want me to start here, or do you want to give some reactions first?
No, start with your spiel. I'll work in with it.
So I've had a big roller coaster journey over the years with An Adventure in Space and Time. Mm-hmm. I remember when it first came out, and it was part of that wonderful, just brilliant Indian summer that was the 50th anniversary. We had Day of the Doctor in the cinema, and that was really good. We had The Enemy of the World and Web of Fear returned, which was a really big deal. We had some great merchandise coming out, not least of which was Richard Marston's fantastic biography of John Nathan Turner. We had The Night of the Doctor as a little surprise. We had the Five-ish Doctors made by Davo. There was so much good stuff happening in there. And in the middle of that, we got this doco-drama about the creation of Doctor Who. And I can remember it falling absolutely into that wonderful spirit. I saw it for the first time. I know I illegally downloaded a copy because you couldn't get it in Australia at first. So I did torrent it, and I think the statute of limitations on torrenting is less than 11 years, so I'm safe. Yeah. But I did torrent it to watch it in Australia, and I thought this is absolutely just gorgeous and mind-blowing. About a week later, I was over at my parents' place, and it happened to be broadcast on, I think, one of the minor ABC channels. Mm-hmm. And the whole family watched it. I thought, me and Dad would watch it, but even Mum, as somebody who, grew up with, having to live with Doctor Who fans, and so, has seen Doctor Who by osmosis, but also is interested in 1960s television and just the history and everything. She watched it and enjoyed it. So there was this really wonderful thing. And I watched it a few more times over the next couple of years. And then, unfortunately, as I looked harder at it, and as I read more about it, in particularly a very interesting Caldor City piece about it, I really started to see the problems with it, and got a little bit upset at some of the, not so much the historical inaccuracies, but I think some slightly nasty rewritings of history, which we'll no doubt talk about. And I kind of went off it in a big way, and haven't watched it for a while since. And so this was an excuse to come back and go, okay, how did I find it? And whilst I don't think I'll ever love it quite as much as I did when I first saw it, and whilst there were certainly moments and scenes in here that I was pulled out of it and I thought were disappointing and problematic, or whatever you might call it, at its heart, I just had this overwhelming feeling of this silly little TV show that we love, that we make podcasts about, we talk to our friends. I'm a grown adult and I have my friends over to watch Doctor Who.
Yeah.
Let's just be honest here. It's a show that we love.
Yeah.
And the idea that show got such a tribute to its creation is just so heartwarming, and there are some wonderful heartwarming moments in here. So I did recapture some of that love I have for it, although its flaws do exist.
that dovetails really nicely with a few of the notes I've made here, Dave, because I wanted to start, while we're still talking, like in the past, our thoughts at the time and all that sort of stuff. I want to start by saying, I know this is going to sound bizarre to some fans out there, but I'm still stunned that this was made.
Yes.
Full stop.
Yes.
I get that Doctor Who was 50. I get that Doctor Who has been watched by millions around the world. I get that it's not an obscure program. Of course I do. I understand that. But I've said this before. Doctor Who is still a very rare TV series insofar as many fans know the ins and outs of it. They know the script editors. They know the producers. Because of Doctor Who, they know how TV was made in 1974, and they can talk about the internal runnings of the BBC. And then we got this, just bowing at the altar of Doctor Who and mythologizing how it came to be. And I still think today, have I ever seen this in relation to any other TV show I've ever watched? And maybe there is something somewhere and it just doesn't come to mind, but I would say 99% of TV shows don't get this treatment. I mean, this is maybe a silly example, but Home and Away has run on TV here, Dave, for almost 40 years. Count them, 40. But have they ever made a drama about how Home and Away started? Do fans know who the producer of the 1994 Home and Away season was? No chance. It seems absurd that someone would know that. So, an adventure in space and time is a very odd beast when you stop and think about what's actually happening here, Dave. It's really odd.
It is just extraordinary to think that it happened, and we are very, very lucky. And you're right about it being a show where we obsess as fans about real behind-the-scenes detail that I think even, Star Trek fans wouldn't necessarily have that level of detail. And if I can sidestep just very quickly, my favourite example of that was my friend and friend of the podcast, Richard, was back in the late 90s sitting on the Doctor Who Club table at some event somewhere. I think it was like a collector's fair or a sci-fi event or something. And he was just sitting there, Doctor Who Club Victoria, join us, whatever. And this bloke walked up to the table and said, "Oh, hi, you're the Doctor Who Club, are you?" "Yeah, yes, we are." He said, "Well, I actually worked on the show." "Really?" "Yes, I was the production designer for one of the stories." "Oh, wow. Which one?" "Oh, the Mind Robber." To which Richard said to him, "Oh, wow, you must be Evan Hercules." And just watched Evan Hercules almost have a heart attack at the fact that this guy just knew that his name because he was the production designer on one show in 1969.
Yeah. Oh, look, that's even pretty obscure knowledge for a Doctor Who fan. I don't know that, for example. But I know exactly what you're saying.
Yes.
And look, broadly, I liked this when I first saw it back in the day. Just that sense of amazement that it existed at all. I thought that Bradley was good as Hartnell, even if his first Doctor was maybe a bit off base. And I just let myself sink down and indulge in this trip back to the 60s, which is maybe what your mother was doing, as well. Seeing the 60s recreated so nicely. Even when you'd stop and think and realise, oh, no, that wouldn't have happened, or, oh, no, they never rehearsed on finished sets, oh, no, Mervyn Pinfield was already dead before that scene could have happened. Park all of that. I broadly really liked it when it went out.
Yeah, so let's dovetail from that into perhaps talking about the history, the presentation of that history, because the interesting thing about it is that there are moments in there that are absolutely drawn from history. So, for example, the bit where Sidney Newman has to sweet-talk Hartnell and he's talking about all the movies he's seen that he loves is actually something that Donald Tosh witnessed and saw and has talked about. So there are things like that that are absolutely true and perfect. And there are recreations in there that are absolutely true and perfect. There are other things that are clearly not. And I think there are some things I get and some things I find disappointing. So, for example, the speech the Doctor gives towards the end is the speech from the end of the massacre.
Yep.
That is recreated. Now, one of the sad things is that female director Paddy Russell has now become a man, which is disappointing given that this story is partly about wonderful female production people in the BBC at the 1960s. Yeah. But the other thing is, something I don't mind, is that before he gives that speech, they have the whole altercation about turning the central column on. Part of me sits there and goes, hang on, the TARDIS wasn't in flight when he gave that speech because Stephen runs back in the door with Dodo in a moment's time. But I don't mind that because it gives us that moment where Hartnell is the only one on the set who knows how to turn the time rotor on and off.
Yeah.
And so he gets out there and does that. And he's sort of having that gruff conversation about, I've been here for 3 years and none of you know how to do anything. And that's an important part of the story. So I don't mind something being changed. The TARDIS was in flight. Yeah, that's fine. Because it is showing us what Hartnell was like at the time. And it's like, that story about Tom Baker when they were starting rehearsals a few years into his time, and a new director came in his first time on Doctor Who. And they were starting the rehearsals, and he said, right, I'm going to do some really innovative and interesting things with the console room. And Tom Baker's gone, look, I've been here for 3 years. There are 3 ways you can film the console room. If you do it your way, you'll see through the doors, you'll see the power cord. It won't work. So maybe just get on with what we know works and just shoot the bloody thing.
Yeah.
Hartnell was in that position. He was the only one there after 3 and a bit years. So I don't mind that sort of historical change because it serves the story. But there's other stuff in there that I just find really weird and almost offensive. Like suddenly Steve Prokaki, who, is this wonderful celebrated designer, was apparently an unprofessional asshole.
Yeah, he just sort of half-asses that design. He just grabs random bits and bobs off his table.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, yeah, there you go. There's the console. Pops some... I don't even know what that cardboard is that he's popping the circles out of, but he pops a few circles out. There you go. There's the walls. Be happy. Go away.
Yeah, so
I don't think that would have happened like that.
Yeah, so it's not that I'm sitting here going, well, that didn't really happen. Or, as you said, look, I get that, the Mervyn Pinfield character is kind of a combination of Mervyn Pinfield, David Whittaker, and others that would sort of come across, because you can't have 5 different characters all, chopping and changing. And so I get that that's an amalgamation. It's a shame David Whittaker isn't in there as well, but I get that he's sort of part of that character, and I get that, as you said, he was still having conversations about William Hartnell after Mervyn Pinfield had died.
Yeah.
I don't mind that. I know it, but I don't mind it. It's where they start to kind of demean individuals that I think it has a problem.
Oh, look, the Paddy Russell thing, to rewind when you talked about that 5 minutes ago, is huge, because I think they're trying to do a sense of female empowerment through this. Like, there's that line, they've never had a female producer here before, Sydney says to Verity. And I don't think that's true. I think there had been female producers at the BBC before her. So it's not the, Doctor Who broke the glass ceiling moment that I think they want it to be. And I think it's actually dangerous putting out ideas out there, in stuff like this, because people hear it and think it's true. Lambert wasn't Sydney Newman's first choice to produce Doctor Who. He had a couple of blokes in mind before her. So, it is trying to big up Verity and do a bit of a girl power thing. But at the same time, it then takes down Paddy Russell and doesn't show the audience that Paddy Russell was directing the massacre. Yeah, you're quite right. All of that said, though, Dave, and I'm just pulling back in my notes now, at the start of the show, there is that line from the BBC presenter. What would you call that? That's the continuity announcer, I guess.
Yeah.
That, you can't rewrite history, not one line, which is obviously cribbing on a Doctor Who line. And then he says, except perhaps when you embark on an adventure in space and time. So from the start, it's acknowledging that it's doing fiction, even though all these people existed, even though this is broadly how things went down, even though, as you mentioned, there are moments in this which were observed by other people and written down, so we know they happened. But the show also goes out of its way to say that it is a fiction, but I fear that, like many biopics and historical movies, people will think that all of it happened, and that's how it was.
Yeah.
Even the Cyberman smoking in the studio, there was no smoking in the studio.
Yeah, yes, and the Cybermen are the wrong colour. Yeah. Because a lot of their tubing was magenta. So, but again, I don't mind about that. But if I can pull a couple of quotes here from the Caldor City article that I did reference here.
Yeah, please.
And the first of all, it says here, Paddy Russell, who directed the massacre, has apparently had a sex change and become a man for a program supposedly made to celebrate the achievements of women in early television drama.
There you go.
This program seems awfully keen on airbrushing all the ones who aren't named Verity out of the picture. And there are some other things as well about some of the production people as well. And then I think to sort of emphasise a comment you just made there, Rob, the article finishes with this comment. Why does this matter? Because now, after this program has been repeated umpteen million times on BBC4, and you just know it will be, those of us who know better are going to be continually fighting the myth that Lambert was the only woman in an important job in the BBC in the 1960s, that Hartnell was some kind of babbling senile fool, and that the designers, composers, and sheen sifters at the BBC were all a pack of Heath Robin-esque bumbling amateurs, and that it was a wonder they even managed to remember to breathe. And I think that's what you were saying there. Whilst this is a celebration of the show, and I welcome it for that, and I enjoy it a lot of that, and we will talk about the stuff I enjoy in a moment, I promise. I think that when it does revise history, the problem is that will seep into the historical record. And so let's talk about the big one, the one that I guess I have the biggest problem with, and that is the writing of William Hartnell. Mm-hmm. Now, I absolutely accept that he was a cantankerous old bugger who would be difficult on set and certainly thought he was irreplaceable, and certainly, as we saw in that scene I described, literally did know more about producing the show than the producers. I get that, and that was what in the end led to him being sacked from the show. He said about John Wiles to the BBC, either he goes or I go, and they're like, oh, we can't get rid of William Hart. Like, I guess you're leaving, John. And then he didn't get on with Innes Lloyd and said, well, either he goes or I go. And they're like, you know what, William, maybe the problem's you. And have you met Patrick Troughton?
Yeah.
You know, whereas they've leaned into the sort of the whole myth about he was so sick and he was so ill and his arteriosclerosis, which wasn't diagnosed nearly that early. He may have been starting to get it, but it certainly wasn't a big part of his life. And his wife certainly wasn't aware of it because it wasn't diagnosed. You know, the idea that he couldn't remember his lines. But again, you listen to The Massacre, he is word perfect in his big speech at the end. He's word perfect with a strong, clear performance as the Abbot of Amboise. So, you know, these are myths. And I think it is to the detriment of the memory of Hartnell that we say he was a bumbling, senile, sick old fool. Whereas, you know, there is a dramatic truth. He was a very capable actor who was also a cantankerous old bastard. And when the two of those clashed, it was time to move him on. I just think you can kind of, I don't know, I just think you can tell that story without having to bring down Hartnell and make him seem sick.
Yeah, it's interesting because the TV movie shows that he's difficult to work with and thinks he's the most important person on the show, and does highlight it in that way you mentioned with the console, that he's the only one who knows how to turn it on because he's the only one who's been there for the 3 years or whatever at that point in time. Or
even that no one's irreplaceable, are they? You know, when he's sort of looking at the Doctor Who annual with him on the cover.
Yeah, exactly. I lean in towards that being more why he was let go of than the fluffs. And I mean, people talk of these fluffs. In some of the stories, people say it's a fluff. It was actually an ad lib. So
or scripted.
Precisely. Yeah. Precisely. So, you know, not everything in this, again, it can skew people towards thinking, oh yeah, he got really sick and he knew he was sick and blah, blah, blah. And he was also a bit of a bastard. No, it was more, he was a bit of a bastard and maybe he was getting a little bit sick. You know, it's almost flipped on its head the way this presents things.
All of that said, we do get this wonderful 1960s recreation. And one of the things that I think does work so well about this is it really does just highlight and celebrate the extraordinary simplicity and innovation of the BBC at that time, where someone like Sidney Newman could just go, I need a program, it needs to be this, it needs to go here, let's do some sci-fi, you're hired, you can do this. And they just go make a show. And it's not in development hell for 10 years, and it's just creatives being creative in a really simple environment. Putting it on TV, there were did we have ITV by then? I think ITV's the late 50s, so we might have had 2, maybe 3 channels at this point. When did BBC Two launch? Doesn't matter. The point is that, you know, there wasn't a lot of TV around at that point, and most people watched one channel, so it was just a simpler time where people just tried stuff and just got on and did it. And also then the innovation that comes from that, the creation of that wonderful theme music that's still with us today, those wonderful opening credits, the TARDIS sound effect, the way it shows that, and like that, it just blows my mind. It's extraordinary.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Look, I agree. And when we did our Bob and Dave do Bob and Dave episode, I was talking about how these two guys just sort of got together and said, we should write some TV. And they just started writing some scripts and chatting to some people at the BBC, and next thing they had a job. And that was like the late 60s, early 70s. We're going back almost another decade earlier here. Extraordinary times where you could be so free and adventurous with your TV.
Yeah, Verity Lambert just, well, I said I'll give myself a year to get on, and if I don't, I'll try something else. Like, I'm just going to have a crack at TV and see if I'm good at it. It's extraordinary, but it captures that spirit really, really well. I think that's one of the big strengths of the show.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And look, I just do want to recap on what we were talking about a moment ago, because I've just found it in my notes. For parts of the story that couldn't have happened or didn't happen in the way they're portrayed, I'm probably less bothered with it now than what I was in 2013. I think as I get older, I haven't mellowed so much as just resigned myself to things aren't always going to be what I expect them to be. Maybe the same as how I'm disappointed by other people's behaviour in real life because they don't act the way I would act, so I try and hold them to account, and that's never going to work. Similarly with TV shows, something might be not done in a way that I would write it or with less care than how I would do it, but increasingly I'm like, oh, hey-ho, what's done is done. It exists. It's not the worst thing in the world,
Yeah, as I said, I'm a lot more at peace with it now than I was when I first really started to think about it, which is a natural thing and I think a good thing. Let's also talk about the effort they went to recreate a lot of classic moments in the scene's history. And the moment that really hit me was when they reenacted that episode, that part of Invasion of the Daleks Part 2, where the Daleks come over Westminster Bridge.
Yes.
And that was the moment I really sat there and thought, they've recreated something from 49 years ago to celebrate this story. How extraordinary is that? How amazing is that? And I really did get sort of, shivers up the spine or whatever you want to call it at seeing that, perhaps more than I did with any other of the recreations.
Yeah, or when they're doing Reign of Terror or something like that. Or when they do Marco Polo and they even do the line, which I'm sure we've said on the podcast before, wouldn't it be great if this was in colour? and just acknowledging that those sets were amazing. And they've built some of those Marco Polo sets. That's not CGI.
No, they absolutely have. They've made Menoptera costumes, and again, part of the joy of seeing it the first time, because I really loved it the first couple of times I saw it, was just that, oh my god, there's a guy in a Menoptera costume. They've made a Menoptera costume. Just how cool is that? Like, I mean, that's a level of creativity and love that's really important. And that's another example. Verity gives her farewell speech on the set of The Wet Planet, when it should be the set of Mission to the Unknown. But I get it because visually, The Web Planet is an extraordinary set with Menoptera and Zabi and all the rest of that. And so I get they've gone, well, that's a much better thing to show. Yeah. That's fine. I don't think that's historical revisionism. That's just being practical.
Wouldn't it be weird to have a Menoptera in the audience when she's giving her speech? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I totally get that.
Should we talk about the cast?
We should talk about the cast, and I'll start by echoing what you mentioned in passing earlier, Rob. I think that David Bradley is brilliant here as Hartnell. He makes Hartnell feel like a real person. He was a real person, which helps, but he does make it feel like a real person with good moods, bad moods. It's a lovely performance. When he's being grumpy, you feel as though this is a guy who's grumpy or hurt, and when his heart's big and he's overawed at the school kids that want to meet him, you feel that as well. It's a great performance. I don't think he's very good as the First Doctor. I don't think he captures the First Doctor at all. No,
I agree. And yet I've heard that his Big Finish turn as the Doctor is better. So I'm wondering, like on TV, we've had him in doing Hartnell in doing the First Doctor, I should say, in Twice Upon a Time, and we've had him doing the First Doctor in little scenes in this, and he's not so good. But apparently in the Big Finish stuff, he's really good, and it could just be a scripting thing.
Look, it could be. But I guess he felt as though he also had to differentiate between playing William Hartnell and playing William Hartnell playing the First Doctor. And perhaps in that effort to differentiate the two, he's perhaps gone slightly stronger in certain directions that I don't think quite work. And the other thing as well is it's unfortunate for David Bradley that he's occasionally recreating scenes that all of us know by heart. Yeah. So, for example, when he's doing the farewell speech to Susan, I don't only know that by heart in terms of the words, but I know the tempo, I know the intonation. Someday I shall come back. Yes, I shall come back. Until then, there must be no regrets, no tears, no anxiety. I know all the ups and downs of that speech. And so when he's not exactly word beat perfect, I'm like, oh, you got that wrong. And that's just because I'm a sad fan. That's unfortunate. But I don't think he brings I don't think he brings as you put it, Rob, the Yoda-like spark to the first Doctor that's necessary. No. Which is a shame because he absolutely brings that spark to Hartnell. And look, if it's going to be anywhere, that's where it should be.
Yeah. It's tricky with Hartnell the man too, because there's not that much outside of productions footage of him. There's like the Desert Island Discs audio, and then there's that interview with him. I think he's doing panto or something, and he's sitting in the chair putting on his makeup, and he seems really pissed off.
Yes.
In that, and it's like, is that just his demeanour, or is he pissed off at doing this interview, or is he pissed off about being asked about Doctor Who, which he's now left, or what is it? But beyond that, there's not a lot of him. We don't have him on morning chat shows or anything to really get a sense of the man. But I still think, my gut still says, based on what we know of him, that David Bradley did nail him as a man. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. Brian Cox, I know, felt like a big deal turning up at the time, and now is an even bigger deal.
Oh, it's quite a coup now to look back and say, we had Brian Cox in this, given how hot property is because of things like Succession and so on.
But I mean, he'd already done X-Men 2 well before this as well. Like, he was already a big name.
Yeah, true. And I'd liked him for a long time, going back to the 1990s. I know he has a career before the 1990s, but for me, the 1990s, he was Major Hogan in the first couple of Sharp TV movies with Sean Bean. And I thought he was great as Major Hogan. I was really disappointed when he didn't continue in that role.
And I was just going to add, his turn as Hermann Goering in the Nuremberg telemovie is exceptionally good as well.
There you go. All of that said, though, despite being a great actor, I think his Sidney Newman is almost a caricature. You look at archival footage of Sidney, and he seems like a quieter, much more gentle kind of guy. Indeed, in the 60s material I've seen, he's really enunciating his words in a super British kind of way. So when Cox is doing this, and you did this about 5 minutes ago in the podcast, Dave, when you did an impression of him, when Cox is doing this sort of Hollywood agent sort of, hey kid, come with me and I'll make you a star, you know?
Yeah.
It really doesn't gel with this softer Canadian TV executive, to my mind. I'll say that much.
It's interesting because I think you're right, but I also think the Sidney Newman character is less about this is Sidney Newman as it is about let's try and capture what was happening in the BBC at this moment, where this brash Canadian from ITV came in and tried to shake up a very sort of sedate world and also capture that energy and that culture that was around as well. And so I think this is another one where if this was the Sidney Newman movie, you'd go, that was a very bad performance. But because this is the William Hartnell Doctor Who movie, you go, he's embodying what we need to be embodied.
Yeah, all the, hey kid, I'm going to give you Doctor Who, you know?
Yeah. Pop, pop,
the
pop.
producer. Pop, pop, pop.
Pop, pop, pop. Yeah, like, I get why that works dramatically, and I think that I think it works.
Yeah. Jessica Raine as Verity Lambert. Dave, do you want to lead or will I?
You go for it, Rob.
I think Jessica has a really strong look for pieces that are set back in time. I think she looked really smashing in the Matt Smith episode Hyde, which was set in the mid-70s. She was really good in the TV series Partners in Crime, which was set in the 50s, based on the Agatha Christie novels. And I wish they'd made more of that show. I thought it was great. And whenever I'd see her in Call the Midwife, I thought, yeah, she just looks like she belongs in this era. She just has that look. And I think with her hair done in a particular way, I think she's a good match for Verity. Visually, you know, not perfect, but you go, yeah, that's Verity Lambert. And her acting is on point. But I think what's less successful with her is her dialogue is full of exposition and telling us what kind of person she is. And I totally get why that's there. You know, they've got limited time to convey quite a lot of information to people who don't know anything about Doctor Who's beginnings. People like your mum, Dave. The stuff she's saying is giving your mum all this amazing information, but it's stuff that we know. And there are times when she's talking and I'd think, there's no way a real person would sound like this. You know, I almost laughed at some of the things she said, not because they were actually funny, but because no one would actually say those things about themselves out loud to another person.
Yeah, look, I see what you're saying. I didn't really pick that up. I thought it was a fantastic performance, and it is the through line of the movie in many ways, as much really as Hartnell is. It's the story of her, and I think that Jessica Raine does capture that fighting spirit, that determination that Verity would have had to have to get on in the BBC. I think that we do get those moments of her facing the ultra masculine society that was the BBC, that very white male sort of British 1960s culture. She captures that really well. We see her desperation at times, which I think is good. She's not shown as this brilliant, perfect woman who never put a step wrong. She makes mistakes, she makes errors, she fixes them, and so you get to go through that dramatic sort of low point and then get to the whole seeing the Dalek kids playing the Daleks on the bus. I think it works really well. It's a lovely performance.
Yeah, and look, just to heighten that, she is the Jewish female, and they team her up with a gay person of colour in Waris Hussein. Do you want to lead on Waris Hussein?
Yeah, look, I mean, again, Sacha Dhawan was a known person at that stage. He'd done the History Boys and everything, but he's a much bigger name now, so it's another piece of just really good advanced casting. And it is interesting that they've picked Waris Hussein of sort of those early directors and sort of made him director, even though he only did An Unearthly Child and Marco Polo. He's kind of the one. I get that. You've got to sort of have a homogenous figure. But yes, again, they're highlighting that sense that if you're not a straight white male from Oxbridge, then this is not your world, and you've got to sort of make your way into that. I'm glad that Gaddis, and let's face it, Gaddis would know better than all of us, that yes, the BBC was officially a straight white male production, but let's not pretend there were not a lot of homosexuals working there at the time. And indeed Jewish people. I mean, it's that comment when, people always have that, spread that fake rumor, William Hartnell wouldn't work with this actor because he was gay and Jewish. It's like, if William Hartnell wouldn't work with anybody who was gay or Jewish, he would not be working at the BBC, full stop, in the 1960s. So let's just put that to bed. But
And he loved working with Verity Lambert, who was Jewish.
Exactly. So we can put that one to bed. But yes, that sense of, you've got to work 3 times harder to make it in this world if you're not part of the Oxbridge establishment, is sold there. And I think it's sold really well. It's sold with actual, imitable, genuine moments. Not being able to get a drink, being put to the back of the queue, not getting quite the offers that you'd normally get. And look, I even did like the line about, I've been offered a passage to India. Oh, one way. Like, I thought, although that's completely inappropriate workplace joke, it so sums up just the culture of the 1960s. And I don't think that, Hartnell was a horrible racist. He just told jokes that anybody would have told in the 1960s.
Oh, people would have been saying a line like that into the 1980s easily, and possibly even the 90s.
Yeah, exactly. So I think Gaddis doesn't shy away from showing the warts and all of the culture, but he also doesn't lean into look at how terrible they were, boys and girls. Look at how bad it was back in the day. We're so much. He just shows it and lets us go, wow, it was a different time, wasn't it?
Yeah. Look, I think Sacha comes across just fine, and my notes were largely about what you've already discussed, because it's sort of confusing how long he hangs out with Verity. Here he's sort of shown as hanging around and discussing their show and all of this, and it's like, well, that's not quite right, but I see what it's doing, and it's helping the not we in the audience just have these two to have conversations and not introduce new people all the time with Verity, I guess.
Yeah, it would have been weird if suddenly, she's talking to Waris Hussein and now she's talking to Christopher Barry. Oh, no, now Waris Hussein's back for Marco Polo. And, I get it. You sort of have to have an homogenous character. One of the biggest stars in this, Rob?
Yes?
Kit Connor.
Who?
Heartstopper's Kit Connor, now quite a big name actor.
Oh, I know where this is going. Yeah, you posted a picture the other day.
Yes, he is the grandson watching the Daleks with William Hartnell. Now a much bigger name. I think will be an even bigger name in 10 years' time. But genuinely, did you spot all the cameos, Rob?
Look, I know that William Russell, or William Enoch, as he sometimes is credited, is the security guard at the BBC.
Yes.
And I believe Carol Ann Ford is the mother calling the kids in.
Yes.
Early in the piece. But you blink and you miss her, really.
Yeah,
with that one.
I must admit, I caught Carol Ann Ford the very first time I watched it instantly, and it wasn't the look, it was just the voice. The way she calls for the two kids did just have the same intonation as the Ian, Barbara, that she did so many times in her time. So I caught that as well. But in Verity's leaving scene, Jean Marsh is there.
Oh, really?
And I caught Jean Marsh the first time, and then a couple of times later I've gone, who's standing next to Jean Marsh? Oh, wow, that's Maureen O'Brien.
Wow, no, I didn't pick those.
Yeah, so they're both. There's a shot of them when they look out. It's Verity's point of view when she's looking out into the crowd, and right in the centre, I go, well, that's Jean Marsh, and then yes, later on, I've gone, oh, that's Maureen O'Brien as well.
Speaking of Ian and Barbara, why don't we do these as a threesome? You got Jamie Glover as William Russell, Gemma Powell as Jacqueline Hill, and Claudia Grant as Carol Ann Ford. I think this original TARDIS team looks pretty good and comes across pretty well, aside from Ian. I've seen people praise Jamie Glover, but I don't think he looks like William Russell at all.
I think he's the one that least looks like the person he's meant to be, but most acts like the person he's meant to be.
Do you really?
I do, yeah.
Because I wasn't even sure it was a good impression of William Russell or Ian Chesterton, however you want to look at it.
Interesting. No, I thought he really, really did capture it. So interesting. Okay.
Okay. But yeah, that original TARDIS team looks good. But I mean, Dave, in terms of people not looking like other people, Michael Craze.
He's about 2 foot taller. and it's extraordinary, given he has no dialogue. They didn't need to cast someone who could act or act like him. They just needed to cast a look-alike. Yeah, that was a bit bizarre.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. I mean, because who have we got? We've got people doing Maureen O'Brien, we've got Peter Purvis, Jackie Lane, and of course Craze and Wills. I don't think any of them really have dialogue, do they? They could all be just like models who look like the real thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the case. The one who couldn't be a model and did have dialogue was the chap playing Patrick Troughton, who I believe only got the job because he's Gaddis's mate.
Yeah, similar to the Ben casting, the second Doctor casting bewilders me, Dave. And perhaps it shouldn't, as Rhys Shearsmith, let's rip the Band-Aid off, is great mates with Gatiss, so it's hard to miss a possible angle there. But the truth be told, I've sort of come around to how he does Troughton at the end of the story. I'm still not sold on it, and I remember at the time this went out, I was really annoyed with it, because, in quotation marks, Gatiss has hired his mate, and he's nothing like Troughton.
Yes.
And so that was just annoying me and I think colouring my impression of what he was doing. But I've mellowed on it a bit, maybe just a bit. But when he does a couple of lines, I'm like, oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah, look, I'm not as egregiously overtly against this as I was when I first saw it. I was going, what the hell is going on? Why was this guy cast? And then, yes, you find out that, he was Gaddis's mate, and then you see that they even went to the point of making Gaddis a Pertwee costume so that they could recreate all these publicity stills from the Three Doctors together. And it's like, okay, that is doing a little bit too indulgent. I don't think it quite works. I believe Gaddis's husband also plays, it's either Richard Martin or Douglas Campfield in the Invasion of the Daleks recreation.
Oh, really?
I believe so. So,
okay.
Gaddis isn't above casting his friends and lovers, but that's fair enough. I do want to talk about Gaddis. Have we finished on the cast, or you got more to do there?
I think it's also worth, because this is interesting, well, to me at least, they put Nick Briggs in there doing the voices of the Daleks.
Yes.
But as far as I'm aware, at this point in time, they didn't have someone sitting on the set doing the voices of the Daleks like that. So, I mean, I think it happened later on in the show's history, so they're sort of showing how it was done later, but certainly not in the early days. But they still managed to sort of shoehorn Nick Briggs in.
Yeah, I was glad, though, that they did actually try to make the ring modulator sound like the Daleks of 1963, as opposed to when Briggs usually does it and he does his own 21st century version of the Dalek voice. I'm glad they didn't do that. So a rare thing for me, I'll give Nick Briggs a pass on this one.
Okay.
So Mark Gaddis's script, I think, is the full Gaddis, in that it absolutely embodies Gaddis's love for the show. It absolutely embodies Gaddis's love for drama and for storytelling, and you see that come through the way that it's shot. Gaddis, I think, does get the balance right in showing the outsider perspectives of Verity and Waris Hussein, and does it in a way that's realistic and not preachy. I think it's really good, and that's no doubt come a bit from Gaddis's own experiences as a gay man working in television. I do think, though, occasionally you do see Gaddis's smugness come through as well. Yeah. There are definitely lines dropped in where you go, okay, that's just put in to show off, that piece of knowledge or that quote. One of the more obscure ones that I think was really clunky was he has William Hartnell actually quote from that Hartnell Panto interview that you mentioned earlier, Rob. The whole thing about, I'm a legitimate actor, a legitimate character actor, is sort of, quite infamous line from that interview.
Oh, God, of course it is. I didn't pick that.
Yeah, that he drops in. And I think it does sound quite clunky when it's put in there. And I just go, Gaddis, you're being a little bit too cute, a little bit too smug in there, and and at times I think that does work to his detriment. And look, that's Mark Gatiss, right? You know, he's this fun, energetic, loving character who's occasionally a little bit smug and a little bit out there, and I guess his work reflects that. I say that
he's a super fan.
I say that having never met Mark Gatiss. That's just the impression I get of him. So probably talking nonsense. But that's the impression I get. That's what I thought came through here.
Yeah, and as I said, he's a super fan, so of course he's going to throw in stuff like this at times.
Yeah, and I think sometimes he should have resisted the urge, because as a viewer and as a super fan myself, you know, someone who can pick up these lines, I actually don't want to, because I want to be drawn into the idea that this is a recreation of Britain in the 1960s. And the moment you drop in a clump of dialogue from the 1970s or a reference to something from the 1990s, you go, yeah, that's right, it's just a TV script written by Mark Gatiss. It's not real. Oh, that's a shame. And you have to sort of come back into it. It does take me out a bit. So I think as amusing as those things probably seem when you're writing them, for me, I think you should resist them.
Yeah, fair enough. I've hit a point in my notes, Dave, where I don't know how this will even fit in, but I want to get it in because you've mentioned a piece from the Caldor City website that you've read and got some information from. I want to do a shout out to tech-ops.co.uk. They have a page called An Adventure in Time and Space Errors, where a lot of production people who were not just in the BBC at the time, but actually working on Doctor Who, have given a wealth of comments. It feels like they've all just watched this and messaged each other about it, and all these messages have been collected on this website. Now, mostly this is super techie stuff, because I believe that's the focus of techops.co.uk. But it was still quite interesting to see how much stuff that would go flying over our heads that we haven't discussed here, like what kind of cameras they're using on set and what the mixing desk looked like and what they would even wear on their feet in the studio, how there was no smoking in the studio, that's something I mentioned earlier, or even how the camera commands that Sacha Dhawan as Waris Hussein is giving are all so very, very wrong. It clearly drives these techie types up the wall to see their personal history being recreated so badly. And you can read all these collected messages on this Tech Ops page. So, yeah, it's one to go out and search if you're so inclined. Probably not the most fascinating thing for me to read through, even a selection of them here in a big clump. But do look that up as well, because I found that quite fascinating. So I don't mind sort of knowing stuff about TV production in general. Yeah.
Yeah, look, it's probably a bit like when I watch a Top Gun movie and I listen to some of the air traffic control commands and just, you know, twitch a little bit knowing what's wrong and what's right. But I get it, because the audience needs to understand. And if you make it too techie and correct, it's not going to necessarily work. Whereas what Dhawan is doing, as somebody who doesn't know the technical terms, I can understand what he's doing. So I do sort of get that. But then you do get the more egregious ones, as I say, like this idea that the sprinklers would go off in a recording studio with electronic equipment. Like, yeah, I mean, you know, even by OH&S standards of the 1960s, that would not have been acceptable. And you know, it's trying to give this impression of just how primitive and almost neglected Doctor Who was. But it does sort of lead to this idea of, you know, these people were so simple and stupid, they would allow sprinklers to go off over electronic equipment. Like, bit too much.
Yeah, we saw how water goes in a studio with the Sophie drowning incident.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Very good. So, Dave, that's been a really good discussion. I'll sort of round it out. I mean, there's many things we could still talk about, many bits and pieces we could nitpick. Even just Sydney Newman saying, "Kid, we got 10 million on the Daleks," you know, when they hadn't had 10 million viewers at that point in time on the episodes that had gone out. But draw a line under that. My biggest fear with any biopic or historical drama is, as I said earlier, that people buy into them as being reality. And it shouldn't need to be said that this stuff isn't reality. You know, the story has that disclaimer at the start. It couldn't be any more overt. Yet I fear with this and things of this nature, people get an impression of what was going on that can sometimes be so far from reality. It's dangerous, you know, to having a fair and balanced view of things. The whole Verity Lambert thing being so important. And a woman too, damn it. You know, it over-eggs the pudding. It airbrushes out Paddy Russell. All of that. Hartnell's illness. It's sad to me. Shows like this have the potential to do harm. But again, it's par for the course with biopics and historical drama. So we're not talking that this is some strange outlier in doing these things by any means. And I think similar to you, I like this. And again, I still can't believe they made this. I can't overemphasize that point enough. That's my main point of this whole thing. I can't believe this exists, Dave. And I enjoyed rewatching it this time.
Yeah. At the moment when you get the Matt Smith cameo, and you do get that sense of, wow, 50 years later, we're still here, still making this show. You just go, wow. Like you, I just can't believe they made this. I can't believe that this show is still going. It's just absolutely extraordinary. So I did like it a lot more this time than I did the last times. I didn't enjoy it as much as I did the first time. That magic, I think, is now gone. And isn't coming back, because I can see the errors in there. I can excuse and understand a number of the historical inaccuracies because it's got to tell a story. I get that. I can't excuse some of the ones that are perhaps erasing people and also just reflecting very badly on people, and where it doesn't really particularly add to the drama. So I think it's a bit of a mixed bag there. As a piece of television, I think it is extremely well made, extremely loving, and extremely enjoyable. As a piece of historical drama, it is a mixed bag at best.
Yeah. Question without notice. At the time it went out, people were quite confused by the ending and wondering what the appearance of Matt Smith meant. What does it mean to you? What's going on there?
I simply saw that as an acknowledgement that even though this is the end of William Hartnell's time, the show is going to continue without him, and it's going to continue very successfully without him. Although I did while you were talking about it, I did find the Candle City line, which is, what does the appearance of Matt Smith's Doctor actually mean? That Hartnell was capable of seeing into the future? That Doctor Who is real? That the dramatisation is a complete fiction and therefore a fictional character can turn up in it? And yes, there were a lot of single takes, but I totally saw it the first time as, although this is your last day here, Mr. Hartnell, what you started will be incredibly successful. And it also said to me, as a big Hartnell fan, all these people who love Tennant and Smith and Gatwell, whatever, just remember, none of this would have happened without William Hartnell.
Yeah, exactly. He's not seeing Matt Smith. He's not seeing anything. It's not his arteriosclerosis playing up. Smith just represents the future that I think Hartnell is thinking about.
Yeah,
and we do owe him a huge debt, and I think that's a good note to end on.
I think so too.
Alrighty, that was our chat on Adventure in Space and Time. Hope you enjoyed it.